Welcome to this week's episode of the Liberty Unveiled podcast, formerly the Teshua Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam Jones. Together, we are unveiling liberty one episode at a time. We'll be discussing the latest in trafficking news, insider stories from those being delivered, and studying the Founders Bible to learn how to return America to sanity and true freedom. Our sponsor for today's show is Teshua Tea Company. Visit TeshuaTea.com or DeliveranceTea.com. Hi guys, welcome to the Liberty Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hopp, and my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam, was able to be here this week, and so
3 weeks.
3 weeks
in a row.
Well, one day.
Yeah.
One day. Who's counting though? But anyway, so
I was counting.
we were just talking about they have a newborn at home that they're foster care parents for, and so we were just talking about how little sleep they're getting, and with 6 kids I can totally understand, even though my wife took all the shifts because I couldn't nurse.
What?
I know.
No. Don't you know? Equality Act. Why couldn't you nurse?
Plumbing's not hooked up.
Because if I'm being totally honest with you here, while you went and got hot water for the tea, I might have dozed off while I was just sitting here. Oh, time to go.
Yeah.
So it probably took you 2 minutes to go get water, something like that. Maybe 4.
5.
5, yeah, something like that.
5 or 6, yeah. Something like
I'm
that.
refreshed. I'm ready to go. That's more sleep than I've gotten the last week. Just kidding.
So you got to show the people your socks.
I don't know if
Pastor
I'm flexible
Sam,
enough to do that. I don't know if I'm flexible enough to.
We'll try. Let's see if he can do it. There, he's got Yoshi socks on.
Yeah, I always have funny socks.
So I haven't. Well, I sent you a picture of them a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to make sure I got you these. So I was out in Baltimore, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, or something. I don't even know. And I found some Abe Lincoln socks. Is
it true you actually work with Black Lives Matter, and that's why you were in Baltimore? You were starting some rioting there?
No.
Just dropping off some bricks?
No. I was delivering a fire truck.
Else, so.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't Baltimore. It was it was Providence, Rhode Island. It was Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah, it was Providence. Because I delivered up in North Attleboro. Yeah, it's like 10 miles away.
I've never been there.
You can't, when you get out to like Providence, New York City, Baltimore, Washington D.C., I don't think you can really tell where one starts and the next one stops. Almost. It's just city.
I've never been in the Northeast. Never been up there.
You're not missing.
Well, I'd love to go up there for the historical value of the things that they have up there.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
But,
and I like the architecture of the old houses and stuff and whatnot. But so these socks. No, that's fine. These socks for the President Abraham Lincoln. Whatever you are, be a good one, Abraham Lincoln. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
And I got to show. I got matchy. So, if you've ever seen Peter Rabbit, the movie Peter Rabbit. I think it's Peter Rabbit. Yeah, it's Peter Rabbit. And his brother wears a two-tone brown outfit, and he's got the whole matchy thing. It's like one of the best lines in the entire movie, but I couldn't.
Now, the trick is here, though, Brad doesn't wear socks.
Not during the summertime.
No, when they say those barefooted farm kids, they grow up to be just barefooted farmers.
Yeah. Well, James Loomis, apparently, I made an impression on his son Daniel, my head usher. Okay, so my head usher at church, his son's only probably 5 or something maybe now. And I went over and was going to bail for him a couple years ago, and I was trying to cut
Just struck me, what generation of Loomis is the head usher? It just struck me there when you said he is 5. I always thought it was the older Loomis.
The older Loomis. I said his son, the 5-year-old.
Yeah, no. I know. I'm talking about the grandpa though. because there's another generation, isn't there?
No,
there's not.
It's just James and then his kids.
I wonder who I think is James's dad. I'll have to find out. I can see the guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Apparently, it's not his dad.
Yeah, no. His parents live over in Winterset, Iowa, I think.
It's tough when you're dealing with this Western Iowa thing. They're all inbred. It's
They're from Central Iowa, so
really inbred. Just kidding. I'm from Central Iowa.
Well,
we'll only marry our second cousins.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Anyway, so I was trying to decide whether to tell my story about James and his ancestors. Have I ever told you the story about his ancestors?
So apparently not. I didn't know. I didn't even know who his dad was.
Well, I have this book that is called The Pictorial History of the Wild West, and it goes so far back in American history that Pennsylvania is the Wild West in the first part of the book, and it tells but they had this family that these kids there was a mom and a dad, and the mom was like the matriarch of the family. And her rule was you could steal whatever you cussed about wanted to steal. Don't get caught. Mm-hmm. That's when you got the whipping, was when you got caught. You could steal whatever you wanted to steal, just don't get caught.
But don't sin stupid.
Right.
Which I hate to say that. Sometimes I want to look at people and tell them that, if you're going to sin, why are you sinning so stupid?
The sin does make you stupid.
That's true.
But anyway, the constable was always trying to catch him. And nobody ever planted a punch on one of these kids. I mean, they were kind of feared, so nobody ever landed a punch on one of them. Well, one day the constable did land a punch on one of them, and he was like, the kid was just dumbfounded that he actually got punched, and if farmers got mad because a horse got stolen or whatever and came after the Loomises, they would be, or this family, which gave away a nice punchline, but they would be like, well, we can maybe find it, we'll find it up and down the eastern seaboard, because they ran a horse thieving ring that went from like Virginia or south, I think maybe even North Carolina, all the way up into Canada and stuff. They had this huge horse thieving ring. Well, it was the Loomises. And I got to church one day, and I was reading this story, and I got to church the next Sunday, and I'm like, hey James, I was reading this book, and it was talking about the Loomis gang. He looks at me and he just puts his head down and shakes it. And he goes, I said, they were talking about the Loomis Outlaws and the outlaw gang. I said, are you related to them? Yes. He goes, the one person that I didn't want to know. And he goes, but I'm related to the good son, not the bad son that started that whole family.
So that's why you always wear a sheriff's star on your...
I should.
Just make him uncomfortable.
Yeah. Huh? But the funny part is now he's our prosecuting attorney for Woodbury County.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I'm like, oh man, this is rich. So anyway, I totally digress. We completely got off subject. But anyway, so you have influenced me. I had to go out and I bought some Cat in the Hat fun socks the other day.
How to make friends and influence people? Wear funny socks.
Yep. My kids were laughing about it. They're like, really, Dad? I'm like, heck.
I've got so many funny socks. My wife told me the other day, she's like, when you go through your socks to just kind of thin out the herd a little bit here, especially with Christmas coming up, because I always tell people, family, like, oh, what do you want? Give me some cool funny socks,
Yeah.
And first couple of years I said that, they're like, what do you mean? And like I would get some just like off-colored socks from some people who didn't have much of imagination, and then they saw what I was wearing and they go, oh,
that's what you mean by funny socks.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have a pair of Batman socks, what are you doing in life? I just don't know.
I don't have a pair of Batman
What are you
socks
doing in life? They're the socks you need, not the socks you deserve.
There you go. Kind of like the president. Never mind. Anyway, so we're going to dive back in here where we were last time. We were talking about the Ten Commandments, the moral law for nations, and we're looking at the 4 types of law, because you have the ceremonial law, the moral law, the judicial law, and the social compact law. And in last week's episode, we were talking about how you have to know which branch of human government, and by human government I mean church, state, family, or individual, which branch of government the laws apply to in order to apply them correctly.
Yeah, just to talk about this, because I think this is such an important doctrine, one that is just vital. We are called to be self-disciplined. That's self-government. If you don't have discipline, self-discipline as a Christian, you're not going to be a good Christian.
Right.
You're not going to be a good citizen. You're not going to be a good family member. Nobody's going to be around you if you don't have self-discipline. If you don't have good family government, I know some people who, and because it's embarrassing for them, I'll leave their names out of it and how I know them. But they are people who are individually pretty disciplined. I mean, they've the wife has obtained several degrees. In fact, she teaches at a college. The husband, very very self-disciplined. He reached a very high-ranking position in the military. Obviously, you're going to have discipline there, but they had zero family discipline, and nobody wanted to be around their kids. Nobody wanted to be around their family. Their kids, I won't list how many they had, but they've had 1, 2, 3, and on their way to a fourth one that's growing up right now, and maybe a fifth one, who are just losers. Grew up to be losers. I mean, and I don't say that trying to be harsh to them. I mean 5 kids who one's a druggie, one's had children out of wedlock and has never done anything productive with their life. One's never held a job for any significant length of time, and all that kind of stuff. And one is a drunken high school student now, right now, and on their way to not living good. And the other one is a promiscuous high school student who's not living, probably drunken too, who's not living their life well at all. Just a family that you don't want to be around. Well, if you have a church that lacks government or discipline, what ends up happening is you have a ruined testimony ecclesiastically. And of course, if you have a nation that doesn't have good civil government, what ends up happening? Well, you have a lawless nation, and you dive into either tyranny or anarchy and then tyranny. These things are so important, and the thing is that if one of these things goes and it bleeds into the wrong area, it goes beyond what it's supposed to have. It creates tyrants. Whether it's a tyrant of civil government, there can be tyrants in ecclesiastical government too, or even tyrants in family government. The father has a lot of responsibility, but there are certain things the father isn't supposed to do too, and that's important. And of course, if we've all met I'm going to give away here a show that I've seen, and some people are going to judge me for it, but if you've ever seen The Office, I don't know.
I've seen clips of it. I don't think I've ever.
Well, I think you've seen something that you'll relate to. Okay. Assistant to the pastor from the skit that just happened at your church there with Pastor Chase's 20th appreciation.
Oh, yeah.
So that was taken from The Office, and it was assistant to the regional manager instead of an assistant manager. But it was somebody in the show, a guy who has a power trip and thinks that they're over these people when they're not. We've all met those kind of people. That's because they have a tyrannical view of their self-government that bleeds into other people's lives where it's not supposed to go.
Yeah.
What kind of tea are we drinking here?
This is the white tea again.
Okay, I was going to say, it didn't look like the green tea.
No, it's the white tea again. Pastor Sam really appreciates the white tea. So
I appreciate the green tea too, but that is just perfection right there.
Did I get it strong enough?
Well, it does maybe look a little weak, but
the next will be. This was just the first one,
but I haven't tried it yet, so we'll see. Yeah, maybe a little weak, but the next one will be really good.
Yeah, the next one will be. And we were talking on the last episode, and that's the one thing, or one of the bigger things. If your tea is bitter, and either if it's like a white or a green tea and it tastes grassy, or if it's a black tea and it tastes dirty, just back off your time. Do a shorter steep time on it, and the initial.
This is the effeminate Christianity brew. It's a little weak.
A little weak. I had a friend of mine call me the other day, and she had ordered some one of the 500-year-old ancient tree tea balls, and
good tea, by the way. That's good tea.
And so she was like, how the heck do I brew this, and I said to her, I said, do the short steep times. I said, don't do a really long brew on that because you'll ruin it.
And you can, the nice thing with this, especially the tea balls like that, they're designed, even if you're doing longer steeps, to re-steep again and again. But especially with the short steeps.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing I told her was, you'll get a lot of steeps out of it because it's 6 to 7 grams of tea. I mean that's a lot of tea.
Yeah.
And normally I always say, typically, like just for us sitting here, typically I'm rebrewing this 3 or 4 or 5 times, probably 5 times during the show, and I'm using probably 3 grams approximately. I mean, I'm not weighing it, but
it kind of normally I'd say that the spectrum as to how it goes. The first one's a little weak, second one's a little better, third one's really good, fourth one is back down to where that third one is, and the fifth one's stronger than the first one still. So it's not like a perfect curve, but it's like starts to taper off a little bit there.
Yeah.
Would you say that's kind of how it normally goes?
Yeah, that is. You'll notice as it starts losing its flavor, and I know that most of the time I probably waste tea because I just, we just don't brew it enough times to extract everything out of it and stuff. And you'll notice, too, with the really high-grade teas, you'll notice that it'll change. You'll notice the flavor profile of it change a little bit, too, as you go through the steeps.
So I would say, like on this one, this is how I would project it going. You got the first one, like I said, a little weak. The second one, you're really going to taste the honey, start to taste the honey notes. Third one, lots of honey notes. Fourth one, it becomes less honey note and more, I don't want to say, because I don't want to turn it off to the fourth one here because it's not grassy, but almost an earthier flavor. And the fifth one is just less of that fourth flavor.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of the way. We talked last episode, and I didn't get to finish my thought, but we were talking about high-grade teas and high-grade coffees and stuff, and one thing that I wanted to point out to people, is we were talking about going to Starbucks and
Starbucks,
Starbucks, and how, a lot of people will spend, anywhere from $80 to $120 a month going there. And the thing is that if you want to save money, get a bag of tea or get a bag of coffee. I mean, a bag of coffee, you're gonna get probably 40 to 50 cups out of that bag of coffee. So if you think about it, $15 a bag, unless you're on a subscription where you get a discount on it, $15 for 40 cups, let's say. Well, let's, for the sake of my math, let's say 50. So, what?
That's about a month's supply, right?
Yeah, but you're probably looking at maybe. Well, no, it wouldn't be 75 cents.
Now, if you're like me, and when you drink coffee or tea, you drink it in a little bit larger container. No, got a good friend who he says, the doctor asked me, how many cups do you drink? He says, I say 1 cup. It's true. I use the same cup, keep pouring it back up. Yeah.
Somebody that's better at math can do the numbers for me because I don't remember what the numbers would be, but I've had too much tea today.
But it's way cheaper.
It is way cheaper, and that's my point. Is you're looking at
even if you're buying 3 bags
25
of
or
coffee,
30 cents,
which would be pretty excessive, really, for a month.
Right.
You're at $15. That's only $45, and if the average person spends $120 dollars at Starbucks, it's kind of expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
Save a lot of money and spend an extra 5 minutes.
Yep. So we're gonna dive right back into here where we
And get
were.
a better cup of coffee too, by the way.
What's that?
I said, and get a better cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. When I go to Charbucks, and the reason I call them Charbucks, hold up your Bible there. That's what their beans look like. Their beans are black. I mean, most of the time I walk in there.
Are you trying to say they're holy grounds? Is that what you're going?
No.
By the way, if you're ever going to start a coffee shop, Holy Grounds or the Great Awakening?
And no, I don't go to Starbucks all the time, but I mean, when you're out on the road or whatever and you walk by, you know, you can't help but see their big grinder sitting there at the rest stops or whatever, especially like on the turnpike and out in Ohio and stuff in Indiana. They'll have a Starbucks there and they have their big bowl of their ground beans and stuff, or their beans that are waiting to be ground, I should say, for their espresso machines, and they're just black. I'm like, dude, that's like one step away from fire hazard when you're roasting it.
That's
I'm
the
like,
problem. In California, they got so many Starbucks out there.
started everything on fire.
It makes sense now.
Yep.
Probably gonna get censored for that one, but
Oh, speaking of California, so on one of the earlier episodes that we recorded, I talked about Facebook and that they have decided that advertising for the Liberty Unveiled podcast is too controversial for them because they apparently, I don't know, based on...
you said the word liberty, and that triggers Mark Zuckerberg, I'm pretty sure.
Apparently, but you know, I would think that rescuing girls out of sex trafficking would you know, play towards our favor, but apparently not. So
They support Jeffrey Epstein, even though, you know, yeah, I'll stop now.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of moral law, so the moral law encompasses God's declarations of what type of behavior or what types of behavior are morally acceptable to Him. Behavior that He declares morally unacceptable includes rape, Deuteronomy 22:25-27, adultery, Leviticus 20, verse 10. Wow. Consanguinity.
You don't use that word all the time?
No, I don't. In fact, I'm not even sure what it means.
Me neither. How do you spell it? I'll look it up.
Consanguinity.
Hold on one second here. Give it to me again.
Con, C-O-N.
Yep.
Sang, sang, S-A-N-G. U-I-N-I-T-Y. That is honestly a word I've never seen before. Consanguinity. Leviticus 20 verse 14. Incest, Leviticus 20 verses 11 to 12 and 20 to 21. Prostitution, Leviticus 19:29 and chapter 21 verse 9. Sodomy, Leviticus 18:22 and 20 verse 13. Murder, Genesis chapter 9 verse 6 and Exodus 21:12 to 14 and Leviticus 24:17 and Numbers 35:9 through 34. Did you find that word yet?
Not. Okay, give it to me here one more time.
Okay, so C-O-N
S-A-N-G.
S-A-N-G
Okay.
U-I-N-I-T-Y. Consanguinity. That might be one.
So I think this would be similar to incest, I think is what it's getting at.
Okay.
From looking at the etymology of the word and everything, when it keeps coming up, it's close related of one blood.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So just the harming or cursing a parent, Exodus 21:15 and verse 17. Leviticus 20 verse 9. Kidnapping, Exodus 21:16. Deuteronomy 24:7. Perjury, Deuteronomy 19:15 to 21. Idolatry, Exodus 22:20 and Leviticus 17:7. Witchcraft, Exodus 22:18. Leviticus and Leviticus 20 verse 27. Blasphemy, Leviticus 24 verses 10 through 16. Sabbath breaking, Exodus 31 14 to 15 and 35 verse 2. Numbers 15 32 to 36, etc. Some Christians reject this view, claiming that it is based on Old Testament law and that Christians are now under a new covenant, a New Testament, and so the Old no longer applies. But for those Christians who insist that they are morally guided only by the New Testament, a few simple questions are in order. Do you believe any of the following is wrong? Bestiality, sex with animals, infanticide, killing of children, or arson, deliberately setting fire to another's property? If the answer is yes, then on what biblical basis do you believe this behavior is wrong? After all, each of these is only condemned only in the Old Testament, not the New. For example, bestiality is denounced in Exodus 22 verse 19 and Leviticus 20 verse 15 to 16. Arson is condemned in Exodus 22 verse 6, and infanticide condemned in. Significantly, the moral law expressing what God says is right and wrong does not change from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Whenever God says something is morally wrong, it remains wrong forever, or until He gives subsequent notification otherwise. As Founding Father John Jay, the original Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, explained, the moral or natural law was given by the sovereign of the universe to all mankind. With them, it was coeval, existent at the same time as man, and with them it will be coexistent, lasting as long as man lasts, being founded by infinite wisdom and goodness on essential right, which never varies. It can require no amendment or alteration. Jay further explained that the moral law was just as appreciable or just as applicable to Christians as it was to anyone in the Old Testament. The gospel not only recognizes the whole moral law and extends and perfects our knowledge of it, but also enjoins on all of mankind the observance of it. Being ordained by a legislator of an infinite wisdom and rectitude, and in whom there is no variableness, James 1:17, it must be free from imperfection, and therefore never has nor ever will require amendment or alteration. Hence, I conclude that the moral law is exactly the same now that it was before the flood, not even before Abraham gave it to, or Moses gave it to the man, or to men at Mount Sinai. Well, because he's even going as far back as the flood.
Well, even before that, I mean, it comes out of God's moral character.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could say eternity past and eternity future.
Present. Right. And why is that?
Because God doesn't change, and God is eternal. And if we're going to believe that God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, we must believe that He is, and that He is immutable too in this. We must believe that His law is also immutable. If it were changing and wishy-washy or whatnot, in fact, I just did a Sunday school lesson where we discussed this. It means that somebody could bring up a better idea than God, and then they could place their authority above God.
Right.
If we believe that God is the authority, then He can't change.
Right. Founding Father Noah Webster agreed, declaring that the moral precepts are of perpetual obligation. Significantly, many passages in the New Testament reaffirm the moral law originally established in the Old Testament, such as 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, Galatians 5, 19 to 21, Ephesians 5, 3 to 5, and 1 Timothy 1, 9 through 10, and Revelation 21, 8, and 22, 15. The moral law of the Scriptures, as set forth by God Himself, became the basis of what the Western world or Christendom called the common law. which was incorporated into the U.S. Constitution in the 7th Amendment. Historically, the Ten Commandments have always been viewed as the embodiment of moral law. As signer of the Declaration, John Witherspoon affirmed, the Ten Commandments are the sum of the moral law.
John Witherspoon was the only pastor to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was a...
He was the only one?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
I was thinking there was more that signed.
Several Christians, of course.
Okay.
But he was the only pastor. And he ended up, I believe it was being a legislator also.
Okay.
In looking at that. But he was a pastor. And so, when people go and say, oh, the separation of church and state and things like that, it's true in the sense that we want the state to stay out of the church's business. Right. And in the way that this describes it as they're separate in their spheres.
Right.
But it wasn't true in the sense that we want religious morality
right.
out of the state. And we see that through even John Witherspoon being there.
Well, and that's the thing, when you remove...
The first Speaker of the House, it was Peter Muhlenberg's brother. I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Muhlenberg. He was a pastor who had his church burned down in New York, and after going in, he came after Peter Muhlenberg. In fact, the story's in Ecclesiastes if you want to go there, but we don't have to go there. That's okay. I'll just tell it quick. But Peter Muhlenberg said, there's a time for war, and went and disrobed, took his black robes off, had a Continental uniform on and a list of 300 men from his church, and went out and became a regiment. His brother went after him and said, "This is wrong. You should leave politics in the war to other men." And then they came and the British burned down his church. And well, lo and behold, he started working pretty hard in politics and became the first Speaker of the House that we ever had.
Well, and it's if we try to remove the moral law, if I remove the moral law and I say that, well, murder doesn't matter anymore, and lying doesn't matter anymore, and adultery doesn't matter anymore, what foundation do I have to build any of my laws upon?
Right. So one of my favorite things to do is to go to, I'm right next to the University of Northern Iowa. I like to go there and I like to talk to students. And when you go in there and you talk to students, I like to ask them, what is the basis for truth? How do you define truth? How do you know what truth is? And they'll come out and they'll say, or how do you define right and wrong is another way to approach it. And they'll say, well, you have your truth, and I have my truth, man. It's like you always run into frat boys, it seems like. But they go and they say that. And then you go and you say, well, how does that work? Do you believe that school shootings are wrong? As I always like to use this on school shootings, because go to a liberal campus, these people hate guns and school shootings, and that's the reason why to get rid of guns, right? And they say, yeah, school shooting's wrong. I say, well, what about to the school shooter? He thought it was right. I said, you just said your truth, my truth, his truth. Does that make it right? Well, absolutely not. That's wrong. And I say, well, then how do you define right and wrong? You know what they answer then? I say, well, society, a populist approach. And I look at them and I say, well, you know what's wrong with that? And they go, what? I say, that means that slavery was right in the 17 and 1800s in America. And I say, so are you saying slavery was right then? Well, no. I said, well, that's good, because I didn't want to call you a racist, but you'd be a racist if you thought so. I say, so how do we get right and wrong? And they stop and they think about it. And they say, well, I don't know how. I say, well, in order for us to find right and wrong, it means there must be a moral arbiter. Somebody had to define what's right and wrong. This moral arbiter, he had to be all-powerful, or somebody could overthrow a system. He had to be all good, or he might make his judgments based on preference. as opposed to justice. So he might go and say, like, orange is the only color you shall wear. If you wear purple, my goodness, you should be put to death.
Right.
Because I don't like purple.
Right.
That's silly. And he must also be all just, or he might come out and say, it's right to have school shootings. And they go and they say, okay. And I say, and you know who fits that bill? The God of the Bible. And he has given his law in the Ten Commandments. And it's called the moral law.
Right.
And then I walk them through the Ten Commandments, especially the second half of them, and I say, look, this is our moral foundation, isn't it? It's wrong to steal from somebody, right? I say, yeah. It's wrong to kill somebody, right? Yeah. It's wrong to lie to somebody, isn't it? Yeah. And so on and so forth. And I say, that's how we define right and wrong. We look to the giver of the moral law, which is the God of the Bible. And they normally go, whoa.
And those, especially if you're finding the frat boys, they would do that. That's funny. So, okay, so Noah Webster agreed, declaring the moral law is summarily contained in the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, written by the finger of God on 2 tables of stones, and delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. William Penn, the great lawgiver of Pennsylvania and Delaware, declared that civil magistrates should draw upon the Ten Commandments, or moral law. John Quincy Adams likewise affirmed, vain indeed would be the search among the writings of profane antiquity, secular history, to find so broad, so complete, and so solid a basis for morality as this Decalogue, or Ten Commandments, lays down. The moral law is openly acknowledged in the Declaration of Independence as the laws of nature and nature's God. William Blackstone, the second most invoked political authority during the founding era, explained the meaning of the 2 phrases, the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God.
So I will correct one thing. Sir William Blackstone is actually the 3rd most quoted person.
Really?
Yeah, so it's behind, now what David Barton's pointing out is that he's behind Montesquieu, and then it's Blackstone. But there was something or someone who was quoted more, and that was the Bible. And so David Barton in the Founder's Bible here, it's not trying to mislead you with this. It's just some people would go and say it was the Apostle Paul or somebody like that. But technically, he was 3rd, but it's behind the Bible, Montesquieu, and him. But if you take the Bible out of it, which is a document more than a person, although we know it is quoting God, who is a person, then Blackstone was number 3.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, this is a quote from William Blackstone. Man, considered as a creature, must necessarily be subject to the laws of his Creator, for he is entirely a dependent being, and consequently, as man depends absolutely upon his Maker for everything, it is necessary that he should in all points conform to his Maker's will. This will of his Maker is called the law of nature. This law of nature being coeval, or coexistent, I think it's coeval, or coexistent with mankind, and dedicated or dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. The doctrine, or the doctrines thus delivered, we call the revealed of divine law, and they are to be found only in the Holy Scriptures. Upon these 2 foundations, the law of nature and the law of revelation, depend all human laws. That is to say, no human laws should be suffered to contradict these.
So, little interesting tidbit on that too. That quote is directly taken from Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England, and this is within the first chapter of this too. So this is what Sir William Blackstone is starting off within the foundation of this, which, by the way, basically American jurisprudence was built upon this work of Sir William Blackstone. And so when we look at this, this is the premise, this is the foundation that Blackstone is laying. So before he goes and gets into all the little details of things, I'm a nerd and read Blackstone, and that's why I know where this is. It's in the first chapter. It's right there in the beginning. This is he's saying this is the premise. Before he goes and he gets into the rights that mankind has, before he gets into even municipal law or anything like that, it is, look, this is our foundation. And if any law contradicts these words, it's irrelevant. And this is the, like I said, the third most quoted, or the second most quoted if you take out the Bible, kind of, to reinforce that idea, person by the founding fathers. And Montesquieu wouldn't have been against this either. They weren't pitting Montesquieu and Blackstone. Montesquieu is just more of governmental philosophy, and Blackstone was more legal philosophy. And it takes both of those things as you're designing law and as you're designing government. You need both sides of those to come together and to make that. And of course, our founding fathers, as they're making a new government, are going to have a little bit more on the governmental philosophy.
Right.
Although there is crossover on both sides. But I want to say that because it's so important. I was talking to a lawyer who was familiar with Blackstone, conservative lawyer, and we were talking about a certain law, and I brought up Blackstone, and he goes, "Oh, no, Blackstone actually supports this thing." And it was wrong. And I just looked at him dumbfounded, and he was looking at me like, "What are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about." And I'm going, if you look at Blackstone's premise, and if you make him be consistent with his premise, that law doesn't fit because that law specifically goes against God's word, which then Blackstone would go and take that law, look at it, and go, nope, goes against God's word. It's null and void.
Yep.
So, sorry to get off on that.
No, that's fine. So, John Locke, the third most cited political authority in the founding era, or fourth, if you count the Bible, affirmed the law of nature stands as an eternal rule to all men, legislators as well as others. The rules that the legislators make for other men's actions must be conformable to the law of nature, i.e., to the will of God. Human laws must be made according to the general laws of nature and without contradiction to any positive law of Scripture. Otherwise, they are ill-made. Romans 1:19-20 and Psalm 19:1-4 affirms that God reveals himself both through what he has made in nature and also through what appears in his written word. Significantly, these two revelations always agree with and never contradict each other. For example, abortion is wrong under God's revealed word, but it is also wrong under God's laws of nature. Consider, there is no species in nature that kills its young while still in the womb. So abortion is a violation of both the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. Thus, it is a violation of God's moral law. The same is true of homosexuality. Homosexuality is condemned in God's written word, and while occasions for homosexuality do exist in nature, they are always aberrations rather than the norm. Homosexuality is a violation of the laws of nature and of nature's God, a violation of God's moral law.
And looking at both of those things too, even if there were murders within the womb, within nature, and even if there was homosexuality rampant within nature,
right?
The issue comes is that they're not self-sufficient. If you kill all of your young, well, you're not going to have a next generation.
Right.
If you only commit homosexuality, you're not going to reproduce. Right. And so when you look at that purpose of nature in the continuum of nature, it goes and it literally cannibalizes itself if you have either homosexuality or abortion as the rule in that. And so therefore it should be looked down upon and punished because it's not good for the whole.
In short, the moral law is the listing of God's timeless, unchangeable, and universal rules of right and wrong that do not change and which apply equally to the individual, the family, the government, and the church. The moral law is just as applicable to the lives of today's New Testament Christians as when it was first delivered more than 3,500 years ago.
Right. So one thing with the civil law that it talks about quite a bit David Barton brings up here is Romans 13, that they're to bear the sword. But it says that they're not to bear the sword in vain, but they're to bear it justly.
Right.
By what standard? If you unhinge the Old Testament from the New Testament, by what standard? And that's when it comes to authorities and when it comes to morality, and we're talking about that, that's the question you should always ask. If you're taking a philosophy class, if you're taking whatever it is, ask your teacher when they make a moral claim, ask them by what standard? By what standard? Because they will either come and they will say that they are God or that something else is God. Hopefully they would say that God is God.
Right.
But if you ask that question, by what standard, that's pretty much all you need to ask, and it will eventually trip them up because they have to eventually admit it's by their own standard. And so that they're making themselves the moral authority. And we're not good enough moral authorities.
No. But then to flip it around on them, because if they're the moral authority, then you ask them, would you appreciate it if somebody did this to you? And they will turn around and say, well, no.
Right.
And they have to. Because they know deep in their hearts that there is a moral law, there is an absolute. And if I don't want it applied to if I don't want somebody to do it to me, then that automatically shows that it's wrong.
Right. And in an interesting thing too, Charles Finney points this out, who was instrumental in the Second Great Awakening. A penalty without a precept is just a suggestion. And so when we're talking about these precepts or these laws, we're talking about a law with a penalty, and God gives the penalties in His Word. A moral law mandates, therefore, a moral obligation that we are to obey.
Right. Right. Okay, so the next section here is the judicial law. Judicial law is the civil and statutory laws that take the rights and wrongs from the moral law and assign penalties for their violations, i.e., the laws setting punishments for murder, theft, arson, etc. As Founding Father Noah Webster affirmed, the moral principles and precepts contained in the Scriptures ought to form the basis of all our civil constitutions and laws. The judicial law applies only to the arena of civil government and no other. And while the moral law remains unchanged across time, the judicial law can and does change. For example, theft is always a violation of the moral law, but at the time of the Hebrews, the judicial law punished it with economic penalties. At the time of the Arabs, with the removal of the hand. At the time of the colonial British, with death. And in America, with imprisonment. The moral violation was the same in all areas. The judicial penalty was different. Similarly, adultery was a violation of the moral law. The judicial law at the time of the Hebrews punished it with death. At the time of Jesus, he still condemned the moral misbehavior, but declined to enforce the previous judicial laws. And in America today, it is still wrong, or it is still a moral wrong, but its penalty is nothing more than public disgrace if the offense is made known, which is wrong. Notice that even the Ten Commandments, the epitome of the moral law, attach no judicial penalty to any of its commands. That is, while perjury is declared to be wrong, no specific punishment is attached to it, or to any other moral misbehavior in the Ten Commandments. In short, the judicial law determines civil penalties for the moral law, and while the moral law does not change, the judicial law can. Any thoughts on that? Or pretty self-explanatory?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I would say I would probably lean more towards if it was a capital punishment given in Scripture, it should probably remain a capital punishment.
I would too.
But we come from a position of what would be defined more as theonomy. But I would still say that what's being presented here is still a version of theonomy.
Right. Okay, so social compact law. These are the laws governing a society that fall below the level of moral law. The moral law is God's declaration of what is absolutely right and wrong, but the social compact law is merely society's agreement upon what is relatively right and wrong. These laws involve things such as speed limits, municipal ordinances, parking regulations, and everything else that a society may enact to help maintain an orderly environment for living. Social compact law is what the Declaration of Independence recognizes as being enacted by the consent of the governed, and this type of law can regulate only those things that are not touched by any moral law. As affirmed by Blackstone, government is free to set its own social compact laws only in areas where God has not already explicitly defined the boundaries.
That is so important to understand that social compact law, and to understand these things. And you think about how ridiculous it is in the United States. You can be penalized for driving 66 miles an hour down a highway in Iowa, but you will not be penalized for murdering a child in the womb. It just gives me shivers just thinking about that. We have gone and taken things that are social compact and made them moral. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. Maybe we kept them social compact. But we've taken the moral law and we've placed the moral law under our social compact law. And why did we do that in America? Because we wanted to have comfort above morality. We wanted to be comfortable in immorality. And I'm going to tell you, spoiler alert, it won't last, because immorality is the passing pleasure of sin. That's what it's called in Hebrews chapter 11. It's only for a time. The comfort of sin is only for a time. And then, just as in the Three Little Pigs, the big bad wolf huffs and puffs and it blows the house down.
Yep. To instance, in the case of murder, this is expressly forbidden by the divine. If any human law should allow or enjoin us to commit it, we are bound to transgress that human law. But with regard to matters that are not commanded, not commanded or forbidden by these superior laws, such for instance as exporting of wool into foreign countries, here the legislature has scope and opportunity to interpose. A biblical example of social compact law is seen in the account of Ruth and Boaz. While Boaz wanted to take Ruth for his wife, he was not the nearer kinsman who had a legal right to marry Ruth. But after the nearer kinsman declined, Boaz then had that right. So to seal the deal, the kinsman took off his sandal and gave it to Boaz. Huh? A sandal? What was that all about? It was the way in which that society had agreed to seal legal agreements, as explained in Ruth 4:7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land. To confirm any matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. Today we would get a notary public to witness and sign the agreement. I like that way of doing it much better because some people's sandals stink. But whether it is a sandal or a notary, both are representations of what each society had agreed upon as the means of legally consummating an agreement.
Well, what do you think about all that?
Yeah.
I mean,
let me here.
Oh, sorry.
Let me
finish it off there.
Yeah, let me finish it off here. Legally consummating an agreement neither violated any provision of the moral law, and therefore both were acceptable social compact law.
So, which do you think's better, a notary or a sandal?
I think the notary. I know how my sandals get to smelling in the summertime. I think the notary anytime.
My sandals smell pretty good because I don't wear sandals.
You don't wear sandals.
My shoes, they might not smell so good.
My sandals are well, let's put it this way. By about the third week of summertime, or the third week of spring, probably more accurately, my feet have Z's on them because I always wear Chacos, and the sun beats down on my feet, and I have tan lines from the Z's on the chacos.
My mom makes candles.
Okay.
And she sells them at the state fair. And it was the first year they're at the state fair, and I mean, it was just a grueling week, and she was just exhausted. And it was about, the 8th day or so of the state fair, and she looks at somebody and she goes, "Hi," and she's holding up a candle. She goes, "Want to smell my sandal?" "Oh, I mean candle." That was a sandal that might not have smelled so bad. We always tease her about that, but I think we're probably just out of time.
Yeah, we got just a little bit here.
Okay.
So in summary, the ceremonial law, which pertained to temple regulations, sacrifices, temple worship, dietary laws, and that which is clean and unclean, and laws of purification, is no longer applicable today, having been completely fulfilled and superseded by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, which is why the law, in the New Testament, and you may have to help me with this one because my brain is running on empty at the moment. Christ fulfilled the law. This is the fulfillment. He is the fulfillment of the ceremonial law. Right. It was implied that he was the fulfillment of the ceremonial law, not that he was the fulfillment of the moral law.
No. I mean, in Peter tells us, "Be ye holy, for I am holy," says
right.
God. That's in the New Testament. By what standard are we to be holy? God's moral law. By
the moral law. The moral law identifies the timeless, unchangeable, and universal rules of right and wrong, the absolutes. The absolutes was my adding. The laws described by Blackstone as the eternal, immutable laws of good and evil, to which the Creator himself, in all his dispensations, conforms. The judicial law stipulates the civil penalties attached to the violations of God-established rights and wrongs. Social compact laws are the laws enacted by a society to provide order. They are laws that fall beneath the level of the moral law and violate none of its provisions. If people want to say that Jesus did away with all the laws, then I should be able to run down the highway at 190 miles an hour because the law's been done away with.
You should be able to go and shoot somebody in the head.
Yeah.
And of course, we're not. You're not allowed to do that.
Right. It is indisputable that the Ten Commandments, the quintessential representation of the moral law as given in Exodus 20 and repeated in Deuteronomy 5, formed the basis of American law and society. For this reason, it was always easier to find a copy of the Ten Commandments hanging in a government building than a religious one. As Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the United States Supreme Court acknowledged concerning the Ten Commandments in government buildings, just in Washington, D.C. alone. We need only look within our own courtroom. Since 1935, Moses has stood holding 2 tablets that reveal portions of the Ten Commandments written in Hebrew, among other lawgivers in the South Frieze. Representations of the Ten Commandments adorn the metal gates lining the north and south sides of the courtroom, as well as the doors leading into the courtroom. Moses also sits on the exterior east facade of the building, holding the Ten Commandments tablets. Similar acknowledgments can be seen throughout a visitor's tour of our nation's capital. For example, a large statue of Moses holding the Ten Commandments alongside a statue of the Apostle Paul has overlooked the rotunda of the Library of Congress Jefferson Building since 1897, and the Jefferson Building's Great Reading Room contains a sculpture of a woman beside the Ten Commandments with a quote above her from the Old Testament, Micah 6:8. A medallion with 2 tablets depicting the Ten Commandments decorate the floor of the National Archives. Inside the Department of Justice, a statue entitled "The Spirit of Law" has 2 tablets representing the Ten Commandments laying at its feet. In front of the Ronald Reagan Building is another sculpture that includes a depiction of the Ten Commandments. So too, a 24-foot tall sculpture depicting, among other things, the Ten Commandments with a cross, and a cross, stands outside the federal courthouse, that houses both the Court of Appeals and the District Court for the District of Columbia. Moses is also prominently featured in the chamber of the United States House of Representatives. Indisputably, Exodus 20 shaped the moral law of the United States. For this reason, the Ten Commandments have always been inseparable from American legal culture.
That's true. In fact, Western civilization is founded on the moral law.
All of society really is founded on the moral law, because
At least society that stands anyway for any length of time.
Because we know it is written on the law, or it is written on the heart of man to know the laws of God. We know it inherently. We know all 10 commandments of the law inherently because it's written on our hearts.
Right.
The scripture talks about that it's written there for mankind, and we know the law, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. You can walk up to the vilest sinner and ask him, if I walked up to you and killed you right now, would that be wrong or right? They're all going to look at you and say, well, it'd be wrong. Right. They know.
That's right.
So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. As I said before in all the episodes, like and subscribe and share. That really does help. Help us beat Facebook at their own game, and help us by sharing this, because they don't want to take our advertisement dollars, and they want to see, at least I have no other conclusion to make other than they want to see girls keep being trafficked. They won't let us advertise. So help us spread the word.
That's right.
We appreciate it very much. Go on to teshuatea.com, TESHUAHTEA.com, or deliverancetea.com, and purchase some of the products from the girls. It helps them. It restores their it helps restore their self-worth. It helps them see that people value and appreciate the things that they're creating, and it helps us continue to provide for the house and to care for the girls. So we really appreciate it. God bless. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, setting captives free one episode at a time. The Liberty Unveiled podcast is a part of the Unresolved Podcast Network and has been brought to you by Teshua Tea Company, TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverancetea.com.